The microphone fell silent. But it wasn't supposed to be silent. 8-year-old Lily Chen stood frozen at center stage, her small hands gripping the microphone stand so tightly her knuckles had turned white. She opened her mouth to sing, but instead of music, only tears came. The Voice Kids stage had seen nervous contestants before, but this was different. This was a little girl's worst nightmare playing out in front of millions. Blake Shelton noticed first. Something about the way she stood there, trembling, fighting a battle no 8-year-old should have to fight alone, made him lean forward in his red chair. The other coaches waited patiently, thinking it was just stage fright, but Blake saw something deeper in those wide brown eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Take your time, sweetheart," Blake called out gently, his chair still turned away. "We're not going anywhere." That's when Lily tried to speak, and the heartbreak began. I see can't," she stammered, her voice catching on every syllable. "I see can't to do this." The stutter was severe, each word a struggle that made her entire body tense with effort. The studio fell into that uncomfortable silence that happens when everyone realizes they're witnessing something painful and real. Let me take you back to how Lily got to this moment, because understanding her journey makes what happens next even more extraordinary. Lily Chen had been stuttering since she was 4 years old. It started suddenly after her parents died in a car accident that left her in the care of her grandmother, Mrs. Chen, in a small apartment in San Francisco's Chinatown. The trauma manifested in ways the doctors said were common: nightmares, anxiety, and a stutter so severe that simple conversations became mountain climbs of frustration and embarrassment. At Lincoln Elementary School, Lily was the quiet kid who sat in the back corner, the one teachers sometimes forgot to call on because they knew it would take her 3 times as long to get through a single sentence. Kids would finish her thoughts, look away uncomfortably, or worse, mimic her stutter when they thought she couldn't hear. Lunchtime was the hardest. While other children chattered excitedly about their day, Lily ate in silence, knowing that every attempt to join in would result in that familiar knot in her throat, the words jamming up like traffic in her mouth. But something magical happened when Lily sang. It was her grandmother who first noticed it. Mrs. Chen would hum old Chinese lullabies while cooking dinner, and Lily would join in, her voice flowing freely, beautifully, without a single hesitation. The words that betrayed her in speech became obedient, graceful servants when wrapped in melody. "Music is your real language, Balbei," her grandmother would say in Mandarin, using the pet name that meant precious treasure. "When you sing, the world hears your heart, not your struggle." Mrs. Chen, who worked double shifts at a dim sum restaurant to support them both, saved every penny she could to get Lily voice lessons. The vocal coach, Mrs. Rodriguez, was amazed by what she heard. Not just technically proficient singing from an 8-year-old, but emotionally mature delivery that seemed to come from someplace deeper than her years should have allowed. "She has an old soul," Mrs. Rodriguez told Mrs. Chen after Lily's 3rd lesson. "When she sings, it's like she's channeling every emotion she can't express in regular speech. It's remarkable." When the Voice Kids announced auditions, Mrs. Chen secretly submitted a video of Lily singing Hallelujah in their tiny living room. The submission video showed a small girl in an oversized sweater, glasses sliding down her nose, but when she opened her mouth, the voice that emerged was nothing short of miraculous. It was pure, controlled, and filled with an emotional depth that made the casting directors watch the video 3 times before believing what they'd heard. When they got the call that Lily had been selected for blind auditions, she was terrified but determined. This was her chance to show the world that she had a voice worth hearing, that the girl who stumbled over "good morning" in class could soar when given the right medium. The flight to Los Angeles was Lily's first time on an airplane. She spent the entire trip clutching her grandmother's hand, practicing her introduction speech. "Hi, I'm Lily Chen, and I'm 8 years old." Even with hours of practice, the words felt like obstacles she had to hurdle one by one. Backstage at the Voice Kids, surrounded by confident children who chatted easily with producers and camera crews, Lily felt her anxiety spike. She watched other contestants run through their introductions flawlessly, their words flowing like water while hers felt trapped behind a dam of self-consciousness. "Remember, Baobei," her grandmother whispered as they called Lily's name. "They cannot see your stutter when you sing. When you sing, you are free." But standing on that iconic stage, facing away from four superstar coaches, Lily felt every fear she'd ever carried about speaking in public crushing down on her at once. The studio lights were brighter than she'd imagined. The audience seemed to stretch on forever, and those four red chairs, turned away from her, suddenly felt like judgment waiting to happen. Blake's chair was still turned around, but something in her distress reached him in ways the other coaches hadn't yet perceived. Without consulting Kelly, John, or Niall, without following any protocol he'd learned in years of coaching, Blake stood up and slowly turned his chair around. What he saw broke his heart. A tiny girl in a purple dress that her grandmother had sewn specially for this moment, glasses fogged with tears, fighting the hardest battle of her young life, just to speak her own name. "Hey there," he said softly, his voice carrying that Oklahoma gentleness that had endeared him to millions. "What's your name, honey?" "Lily," she managed, each letter a monumental effort that made her face scrunch with concentration and frustration. The other coaches, Kelly Clarkson, John Legend, and Niall Horan, turned their chairs around too, not because they heard her sing, but because they recognized something happening that transcended any singing competition. This was humanity in its rawest form, and they knew they were witnessing something that would stay with them long after the cameras stopped rolling. Blake broke every rule the voice had ever established about coach-contestant interaction during blind auditions. He walked down from the coach's platform, across the stage floor that had been polished to mirror perfection, and knelt down directly in front of Lily so they were eye level. "Lily," he said, his voice now stripped of all performance, all entertainment value. This was just Blake Shelton, the man who'd grown up in small-town Oklahoma, talking to a child who needed someone to understand her struggle. "Can you tell me what's wrong, sweetheart?" Through her tears, fighting every single word like she was climbing a verbal mountain, Lily began to explain, "I have a stutter. I can't talk right. At school, KK kids laugh." She took a shaky breath, her small chest rising and falling with the effort. "BB. But when I sing," her voice grew slightly stronger. "When I sing, the W words come out perfect." Blake's expression underwent a complete transformation. Not pity, never pity, but recognition, understanding, respect. He looked up at Kelly, John, and Niall, who were all leaning forward in their chairs, completely invested in this moment that had nothing to do with vocal runs or key changes and everything to do with human courage. "You know what, Lily?" Blake said, his voice thick with genuine emotion. "I think you might be one of the bravest people I've ever met in my entire life." "Be brave?" she asked, her voice small and confused behind her wire-rimmed glasses. "You came up here tonight knowing it would be hard to talk in front of all these people, but you came anyway because you have something important to share with the world. That's not just brave, honey. That's heroic. That's the kind of courage most adults never find in their whole lives." Blake stood up slowly and turned to address not just the other coaches, but the entire studio audience, the crew members who had stopped their technical work to watch this unfold, and the millions of viewers who would eventually see this moment. "Everyone here needs to understand something," he said, his voice carrying across the silent studio with the authority of someone who'd spent decades understanding what real talent looked like. "This little girl has been fighting for every single word her whole life. She's had to be brave just to say good morning to her teacher. But when she sings, I bet those words don't just come out right. I bet they fly free like birds that have been waiting their whole lives to soar. Am I right, Lily?" She nodded enthusiastically, a small smile breaking through her tears for the first time since she'd walked onto that stage. Blake walked back toward his chair, but he stopped halfway there and turned back to face Lily directly. "So here's what we're gonna do," he announced, his voice gaining strength and conviction. We're going to restart this audition completely. But first, I want you to remember something that I wish someone had told me when I was 8 years old and scared of my own shadow." He knelt down again, this time closer, so close that only Lily and the most sensitive microphones could pick up his words. "Your stutter doesn't make you broken, sweetheart. It doesn't make you less than anybody else in this room. What it makes you is strong. Every word you fight for, every sentence you push through, when it would be easier to stay quiet, that's building muscles other people don't even know exist. You're like a little warrior, and warriors earn their strength through battles." Lily's eyes widened behind her glasses. No one had ever called her a warrior before. Blake stood up again and addressed the coach's platform. "Kelly, John, Niall, I want y'all to turn your chairs back around. We're giving this young lady the blind audition she came here for, because I have a feeling we're about to hear something extraordinary." The other coaches, all parents themselves, all people who understood the power of encouragement in a child's life, slowly turned their chairs back around without question. Blake returned to his seat, but before sitting down, he offered Lily one final piece of guidance. "Now, Lily, I want you to close your eyes for a minute." She did, her small face peaceful for the first time since she'd walked onto the stage. "Take the biggest, deepest breath you can." Her chest rose and fell dramatically. "And remember that when you sing, you're not fighting words anymore. You're setting them free. You're letting your heart speak in the language it was born to use." Blake finally sat down and turned his chair away from the stage, but his body language was different now. He was leaning forward, completely focused, waiting not just to hear a song, but to witness what he suspected would be a miracle. What happened next was pure magic, the kind of moment that reminds everyone in the room why music exists in the first place. Lily opened her eyes, squared her small shoulders, and looked directly at the microphone that had been her enemy just minutes before. When she opened her mouth, what emerged wasn't just singing, it was transformation. She chose "Somewhere Over the Rainbow," but her version was unlike anything anyone in that studio had ever heard. Her voice was clear, powerful, emotionally sophisticated in a way that seemed impossible from someone so young. Every note was perfect, but more than that, every note carried the weight of every word she'd ever struggled to say, every moment she'd felt different, every time she'd wished she could just be like everyone else. The studio was completely silent except for her voice, which seemed to fill every corner, every crevice, reaching into places in people's hearts they'd forgotten existed. Camera operators found themselves wiping their eyes. Audience members sat with their hands pressed to their chests, and on the coach's platform, 4 music industry veterans sat in stunned silence, listening to one of the purest, most emotionally honest performances they'd ever experienced. When she finished, the silence stretched for just a moment, not the awkward silence of before, but the reverent silence that follows something sacred. Then Blake's button lit up. Kelly's followed immediately. Then John's. Then Niall's. All 4 coaches had turned around, but this wasn't about competition anymore. This was about recognition, about honoring something bigger than any television show. Blake was already out of his chair and walking back toward the stage before the other coaches had even fully turned around. When he reached Lily, he didn't kneel this time. Instead, he opened his arms, and she ran into them, small and fragile and perfect. "Lily," he said, his voice thick with tears he wasn't bothering to hide, "I don't just want you on my team. I want to learn from you. You just taught this whole room, this whole world, that our biggest challenges can become our greatest strengths. You didn't just sing that song, sweetheart. You transformed it. You made it yours." But Blake wasn't finished. He held Lily at arm's length so he could look directly into her eyes, and he spoke words that would change her life forever. "I want you to make me a promise, okay? Every time someone makes you feel bad about your stutter, every time kids at school make you feel different, every time you feel like giving up or staying quiet when you have something important to say, I want you to remember this moment. Remember that you have a gift that can change the world, and stuttering is just the package it came in. Some of the most beautiful gifts come in packages that look different from what we expect. The audience erupted in applause, but this wasn't the typical excited cheering of a singing competition. This was something deeper: recognition of courage, appreciation for authenticity, and the kind of emotional response that happens when people witness genuine human connection. Kelly Clarkson, herself no stranger to childhood struggles, wiped tears from her eyes as she spoke. "Lily, that was one of the most beautiful things I've ever heard in my life. Your voice is incredible, but your courage is even more incredible." John Legend added, "You remind us all why we fell in love with music in the first place. It's not about being perfect, it's about being real." Niall Horan, the youngest coach, said simply, "You're going to inspire so many kids who feel different. You're going to show them that different can be absolutely magical." Lily chose Team Blake, though honestly, all four coaches would have been honored to work with her. But something about Blake's immediate understanding, his instinctive recognition of her struggle and his refusal to treat her as fragile or broken, made the choice obvious. Over the following weeks, Blake became more than just Lily's coach. He became her champion, her advocate, and in many ways, the big brother she'd never had. He worked with the show's producers to bring in speech therapists, not to fix Lily's stutter, but to help her develop confidence in all forms of communication. He arranged for her to meet other successful people who stuttered: actors, musicians, business leaders, who had turned their speech differences into sources of strength rather than shame. During rehearsals, Blake would often sit with Lily before her performances, not working on vocal techniques or staging, but simply talking with her about courage, about the difference between being perfect and being authentic, about how the best artists are often the ones who've had to fight hardest for their voices. "You know what I learned from you, Lily?" he told her before one particularly challenging live show. "I learned that real strength isn't about having everything come easy. Real strength is about showing up anyway, especially when it's hard. You've been doing that your whole life, and now you get to show millions of people what that looks like." As the Voice Kids progressed, Lily's confidence grew exponentially. Not just in her singing, though her performances continued to be breathtaking, but in her speaking as well. She began giving interviews, her stutter still present but no longer something she tried to hide. Instead, it became part of her charm, part of what made her story so relatable to kids around the world who felt different or struggled with their own challenges. The transformation was remarkable to watch. The shy, frightened girl who had broken down on the stage during her audition evolved into a confident young performer who spoke openly about her stutter, who advocated for other children with speech differences, and who used her platform to spread a message that resonated far beyond music. In the finale, Lily performed an original song that Blake had helped her write, called "My Voice." It was a song about finding strength in difference, about the journey from shame to pride, about learning that the things that make us unique are often the things that make us powerful. When she won the Voice Kids, Blake lifted her up in the biggest hug, spinning her around on stage as confetti fell and the audience gave her a standing ovation that seemed to last forever. During her victory speech, Lily's stutter was still there, but she pushed through every word with the confidence and grace that Blake had helped her cultivate. "I do you want to tell every KK kid who talks like me or feels different in any way, why you have a voice too. Maybe it comes out different than other people's, but it still be beautiful. It's still worth hearing. And sometimes the most important things we have to say are the hardest to get out." Blake stood behind her throughout her speech, his hands on her shoulders, tears streaming down his face, as this 8-year-old girl delivered a message that adults twice her age struggled to understand. When she finished, he leaned down and whispered something in her ear that the microphones didn't pick up, but whatever he said made her smile the biggest, most radiant smile anyone in that studio had ever seen. The impact of Lily's journey extended far beyond the Voice Kids. The jacket Blake wore during her finale performance was later auctioned for charity. raising over $100,000 for the Stuttering Foundation of America. But the real impact was in the thousands of messages that poured in from children and parents around the world who found hope and inspiration in Lily's story. Schools began using videos of her performances to teach lessons about empathy, courage, and the importance of celebrating differences rather than hiding them. Speech therapists reported increased confidence in their young clients who had seen Lily succeed not despite her stutter, but with it as part of her unique gift to the world. Today, Lily Chen is still 8 years old, but she's also a recording artist, a motivational speaker, and Blake Shelton's honorary little sister, who taught him one of the most important lessons of his career: that being a coach isn't about finding perfect voices, it's about helping people discover that their imperfections might just be their greatest gifts. She still stutters when she talks, and she probably always will, but she also speaks at conferences about childhood speech disorders, records music that tops children's charts, and maintains a friendship with Blake that has enriched both their lives in ways neither expected. "Lily taught me something I wish I'd understood earlier in my career," Blake said in a recent interview. "I spent so many years looking for people who could sing perfectly, hit every note, nail every run. But perfect voices are a dime a dozen. What's rare, what's truly special is finding someone who can take their struggles and turn them into strength, who can show the world that being different isn't a disadvantage, it's a superpower. Because sometimes the most beautiful music comes from the people who have to fight the hardest to let it out. Sometimes the voices that struggle the most in speech soar the highest in song. And sometimes an 8-year-old girl with wire-rimmed glasses and a stutter can teach a country music superstar and millions of viewers what courage really sounds like. That's not just entertainment. That's transformation. That's the magic that happens when someone stops seeing obstacles as limitations and starts seeing them as stepping stones to something extraordinary.